Terry, I'm fascinated by the people that you run into in your life.
Yeah, thank you.
The way you told me the story of how you met Chef Edward Lee is that you went to where he works and then you just started talking to him.
Yeah, went to where he works is a little bit misleading. This place where he works is was named one of the 50 best restaurants in America. Um, as a fairly jaded fine dining person, it is hands down my favorite place in Louisville. So where he works, he owns. He owns a couple of restaurants in Louisville. Yeah, Edward Lee, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Russ, he has maybe he can tell us a little bit about it, but he has a place. He has two places in Louisville. One is like a Louisville institution. It's a place called 610 Magnolia. Then he also has the Korean barbecue place I just mentioned called Nami Steakhouse or Nami
Just Nami.
Barbecue.
Nami Korean Steakhouse, if you want to get technical.
Yeah. Then tell us a little bit about the place in DC.
In DC, we have two locations of a restaurant called Succotash, which is basically the best of Southern food classics. With a little bit of Ed Lee twist put on there.
What would the Ed Lee twist be?
So we have, one of our best-selling dishes is what we call a dirty fried chicken, which is basically our fried chicken dish, but it's basted in like a spicy barbecue sauce that uses the Korean spice gochujang as its base. It's one of our best-selling dishes. Got a little collards and kimchi, some pork ribs with a little bit of Korean flavor to it. But it's basically like but it's all of it tastes Southern. It's like just a little bit of a kick at it to some dishes.
Ed, how many hours per day do you spend thinking about food?
Um, I don't know. I don't count it, but
Would you say you're ever not thinking about food?
Yeah, I'm thinking about most of it's food. I do a lot of food. Then I do some writing, but I guess I'm writing about food. Then I do podcasts. I guess that's about food too.
Yeah.
This is my food handicap. I would say in a given day I think for about an hour about food. And then it sneaks up on me every time it's time to eat. So I'm
All
kind of
right,
the
yeah. You're one of
anti-Terry.
those. You're one of those last minuters.
Yeah, but then when food is good and in front of me, I feel like the words come to describe what it. Somebody told me recently I was out at a pretty good Turkish restaurant, and they're like, "Oh, you must cook a lot," and I'm like, "I don't cook ever. I cook an egg for my kids for breakfast." And what I'm fascinated by is where I went wrong to not be thinking about food until the last second, and whether I'm redeemable.
I don't
Is
know,
there
dude.
hope? Can
Are
I
you
get on
smoking too
the
much
food
weed?
train?
What else are you thinking about? What's the
Do you
what
know
else
that song? You
occupies
know the
your
song
mind?
"Smoke on the Water"? It's just like repeating in my head. Dun
Yeah.
dun dun. I don't
Chef,
know.
how did you get started? Like, were you always drawn? Everyone, we're interested. There are two aspects that I want to ask about here. We're interested in the tech space. We have a lot of conversations with folks in tech. We both work in that space. We're interested in the concept of 0 to 1. So this is a two-part question for you. Going from the child Ed Lee to the culinary artist and restaurateur Ed Lee. How did that happen?
And do
Can
you
you?
remember thinking about food as a child?
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, in many ways, it sounds a little cliche, but I didn't choose food. Food chose me. So I've been obsessed with it ever since, earliest memories. So it's something that, which I think most, I don't know. I guess you see some kids gravitate towards, like, there's some kids like you'll see and they just gravitate towards music or art or, you know, um, but I've always been obsessed with food since I was a little kid. And so in some ways I feel lucky in that I never really had to like make a decision about what I was going to do with my life. Like the minute I had some control of my life, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. Like this is what I've always wanted to do since I was 11 years old. I don't know when it was. I remember telling my, I was probably like 11 or 12, and I told my parents I was going to be a chef. I didn't really even know what that meant. But it's like saw magazines and there wasn't much food TV back then either. So just like magazines and certain newspaper articles. And I said, yeah, I'm going to grow up and be a chef one day. And, my dad was like, sure, Billy's going to be an astronaut. And, it's like, when kids have these things, they're like, yeah, sure. And then, as I got older, I would, I was 16 and they're like, well, what are you going to do with your life? I was like, I think I'm going to be a chef. And like, okay, you'll grow out of it. And then, 22, they're like, what are you going to do? And I was like, yeah, I got a job as a chef. And then, that's when the worry set in with my parents.
So
But yeah, it's always been part of, my DNA, I guess.
take me through that, because I know the restaurant space from my younger years. I know there's generally a path, especially for a chef. There's probably a culinary school, an apprenticeship, probably some really crap jobs on a line somewhere. Like what did that look like for you from 16 to 22? I'm going to be a chef, then an application. How do you make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with a lot of reading. Didn't have the internet back then, so it was literally going to, and there wasn't culinary programs the way they are now. So it was literally reading all the food magazines. Some of them that don't exist anymore, like Gourmet Magazine, Bon Appetit. I grew up in New York City where you had you'd have to go to the basement, right? And that's where all the laundromats were. And so I'd go down with my grandmother or my mom, watch the laundry, and people would leave old magazines down there in like a bin. And so I would fish through all the old magazines and I would steal all the, food magazines. And I would bring them back to my room. And I would always joke like other kids, my age had Playboys under their pillow. And I had like Gourmet magazines and Dreaming of Venison Loins under my pillow. And
The
that was
Playboys came later.
the Playboys came later.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was a lot of reading. I also, growing up in New York City and Manhattan, I always had summer jobs in restaurants since the time I was 14. So it was like being a busboy, mostly being a busboy, delivering food, whatever it was, being a porter. So I just kind of like ever since my first job in the restaurant business, I was just always in restaurants, so learning by osmosis. Even though I wasn't cooking, I would always like peek and see what they were doing in the kitchen. So and then really, I just once I never went to cooking school. I went to cooking school for like 1 week because I'd been sort of working in restaurants, as a teenager. And when I graduated from college, my parents said I had to graduate from a normal university before I pursued anything else. So I graduated from college and then I enrolled in cooking school. It was really expensive back then. And I realized after 1 week, I realized I knew 90% of what they were teaching already because I'd sort of been working in restaurants. So I quit and walked 60 blocks downtown, walked into an Italian restaurant. And they needed a cook, and I started cooking there. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't elaborate by any means, but started there and then move up and just did the grind and worked in a bunch of restaurants, and then I had the opportunity, just a weird opportunity. I was walking downtown Chinatown in Manhattan, and there was a for rent sign the guy was literally nailing the for rent sign on this thing, and got to talking to him, and rent was really cheap. And so, this was back when you could do things, sort of under the radar a little bit. And I said, I'll take it and sign the lease and opened my first restaurant when I was 25 on Mott Street in New York City.
Okay. So that first restaurant at 25 is not Nami Korean Steakhouse, top 50 restaurants in America at this age. So how do you go from again, we're really interested in how things start and where,
Mhm.
the trajectory to where you are now. How do you go from that? I'm sure, at 25 you're carefree, so there's not a lot of pressure, but you're opening real deal restaurants now. I mean,
Yeah.
you're opening,
No,
these
I
are
mean,
not,
actually, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of pressure. I took out a lot of, borrowed a lot of money from people I knew and friends. So there was actually, I didn't take a day off for, I think it was a year and a half. I worked 7 days a week for a year and a half because I had to pay off like major debt, and probably borrowed money from some unsavory people that I shouldn't have. But when you're young and desperate, you do what you need to. So yeah, and actually, we actually got some pretty. I had no idea what I was doing. I was 25. I cut my teeth on the business. But, there's nothing like fire. Trial by fire, and it was like, okay, you can. The plumbing goes down. You can pay $800 for a plumber to come in, or you can fix it yourself. So I would go down to Chinatown Plumbing and buy a few parts and ask the dude how to do it, and I would get in. So it was a lot of it was a great education for me. I learned everything. I learned to like do my own flower arrangements, to pick the music, how to do how to fix the toilets when they go down, like everything in addition to food, because it was necessary. And so that sort of led me on the path to not only being a chef, but also being an entrepreneur, and knowing that I wanted to always have control of that aspect of it. But we had pretty good press. I had no idea. I would say we were probably like a year into the business, maybe 8 months, and there was a story about, like, I can't even remember what it was, but it was a story about what is Korean food, and it wasn't a Korean restaurant, but we definitely had some aspects of Korean food on the menu, and they had a mention of our restaurant. It was called Clay back in the day. They had a mention of it, a small picture of it on the front page of the dining out section of the New York Times. And I remember getting off the subway, walking to the restaurant, and we were never busy for lunch. There was like we would do like 10, 12 people for lunch, and I'd get there like at 11:30. Walk in and help out the boys set up and run lunch. And I'm reading the thing, and then there's like a line of people next to me. I'm a block away from the restaurant, and I'm like, "What are all these people waiting online for? It's so fucking weird." And I'm reading the article, and I get to my front door, and I realize that line of people was for my restaurant. And so I was really naive about things like that. Like, I was like, "Who reads the New York Times? I don't know. Like, what how important is that?" And
not too many
obviously we
people.
got our asses kicked for the next like 3 4 weeks, and probably put out the shittiest food I ever have in my whole life. And that was like a lesson learned. But those are things that you just, I learned the hard way, in many respects, because I just jumped into it. But I also really valued those experiences because it really taught me an invaluable lesson about just perseverance and owning it all, and not being afraid, also not being afraid to fail and make mistakes. I mean, that restaurant ultimately failed. We had um, 4 years under our belt. We were doing great. I was finally making some money, and then 9/11 happened, and we were in downtown, so we were probably 20-minute walk from the towers. And when that happened, it just crushed the business, and ultimately had to sell it. And ultimately that's what led to me moving to Louisville, because I wanted to get out of New York and just clear my head for a while. Ended up in Louisville, Kentucky for the Derby. Probably drank a little more bourbon than I should have, and
As one does.
as one does. And I don't know, I fell in love, and I was like, I'll connected with Eddie Garber, who was the former owner of 610 Magnolia, which is the restaurant that I now own. We just got to be really good friends, and he said, I'm old, I'm retiring, I don't want this anymore. You should take over my restaurant." I said, "You're crazy. I'm a Korean kid from New York. I'm not going to run a restaurant in Louisville, Kentucky." And we became friends, and he would call me every week. I went back to Brooklyn, and he would call me every week. And, finally I was like, listen, I'll come down for like 6 months, and I'll hang out and cook and just do what I want to, but I'm not going to like, I'm not cooking Kentucky food. I'm just going to do what I do. And then, I'll move back to New York. And yeah, after 6 months, I was like, I kind of like it here. And, the living's good. I could actually save some money. Um, and the people are nice. And so I was like, I'll stay a little longer. Stay a little, it's been 21 years, so
I
it's
want to I want to ask. I love and thank you for describing like some of the trials and travails of early restaurant. Having your early place. I want to know like what's the ratio now, and has it always been this? You're clearly a culinary artist. You're 610 Magnolia is, for those who haven't been there, is it's artistry. I mean, that's
thank you.
kind of your thing. So how do you balance like the rigor of running a business versus maintaining the perspective that what you're doing is art?
That's a good question, and it's probably the hardest thing about the business, because there are, and I give this speech to all my young chefs and all the people that are wanting, because I probably get at least one or two people a week asking for advice about how to open a restaurant or how to become a chef.
How to lose
And
money?
yeah, there's plenty. And it's like there's a line on a graph, right? And you're on the left is you're just in it for the money. It's just a business. And then on the right, you're just an artist. And if you go all the way to the left, if that's what you want, then just buy a franchise. Open a McDonald's, open a KFC. You'll be rich by the time you're 40. You'll have complete, satisfaction of monetary rewards. But you're just running a factory of food, you know, and then go all the way to the other side. And you can be an artist, and you can hand make your plates, and um, you know, sew your own uniforms, and grow your own pottery, and do all that. I mean, it's, and there are restaurants that are extreme like that, and they're fantastic, and they're beautiful, and they're complete art. You won't make any money. There's a price for that, and there are people who are willing to invest in those restaurants. Excuse me, simply for the art. Just like there are people who, fund museums, and people who, buy great works of art for insane amounts of money because they want the artist to thrive. And so there is that system out there for chefs too. But you have to be completely obsessed with nothing but, aesthetic and flavor and taste, and bring things. And that's, and then there's everything in between. Right. And so the question for every chef, everyone in this business, is where do you want to fall on that line? You can be right in the middle, you can be closer to an artist. And I think that's something that also it's a moving target too, because when you're younger, you tend to be more of an artist. And as you get older, you tend to worry about money a little bit more. So that, where I fall on that line, is always a moving target, and it kind of pushes, back and forth sometimes. But I don't know, if I can be a 65% an artist and 35% a businessman, that's a decent place for me, and so, but you think about that a lot, and you think about your different ventures that you do, and whatnot. Um, Not everything you do is going to make money. Not everything you do is going to be remembered as great art. But you hope that between the two, you can strike a balance where it's, and at the end of the day, for me, it's making sure that the public and the people who are coming to my restaurants are having a good time, and who are understanding. They're getting, for the dollars that they're spending, that they're getting something back. and they're, they feel like they are appreciated. And I do this at the end. The other thing that's really important, um, and where I don't fall along the line of being too much of an artist, and most chefs I think would agree, is that we do this for the people. It's not about our own ego. Um, and so that to me is, there's always sort of that guiding uh, um, sort of mission in the back of my head, is that you're only as good as your last meal.
I love that. Have you said no to something that you regret? An
Uh,
opportunity?
yeah, I say it all the time. I say no to things all the time, and I think there was a hot dog company that wanted me to wear a costume and do some kind of promotional gig, and I said no.
Was this recently?
It wasn't that far off, and it was a couple of years ago, but it was I think it was right before pandemic. Um, but man, it was a lot of money,
To wear a hot dog costume.
Yeah, but just to endorse and promote. I don't want to say the hot dog company's name, but it was a lot of money I left on the table.
Doesn't it feel good though?
No, it doesn't. It feels horrible. Are you kidding me?
No, no, no. Like you
No,
have.
you're wrong. That's where you're wrong. I'm like, I could really use that money, but there's just some, that I feared the backlash, and the sort of ethical moral, it's not even my ethics. It's just, there's some things you have to have some self-respect, I guess.
Are,
Don't you feel like that solidified your like what your where you stood? You
No,
knew a little
because
bit more
because
about
if,
yourself
if they
then.
approached me again, I probably would say yes. just depends on where you are, year to year. But no, yeah. I mean, listen, there's I don't know. I guess you get to some level of success, and there's just weird things that get thrown your way. And so there are, there's lots of restaurant opportunities. I don't regret them, only because I don't know how they would have turned out. You know.
Do you spend a bunch of time with other people that have made it and are getting weird hot dog opportunities thrown at them?
We talk occasionally. Yes.
he's in this stratosphere of chefs where if a chef if a Guy Fieri or somebody that's well known like that is coming through Louisville or through DC, he gets the phone call. Hey, you want to hang out? You want to show me around this
Sometimes.
place?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. We discussed this a little bit. I want to know. So there are a million things that I want to ask you. Having served my tour of duty in the restaurant world back in the day, million things that I want to ask you. But one thing that interests me to this day is food distribution and restaurants. And I feel like I think Cisco and Gorton's in the US are like the distributors. And if you own a restaurant, some really high 90% of what you purchase for that restaurant comes from one of those two places in terms of food and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the case at a restaurant that you of your caliber? Are there alternatives to Gordon's and Cisco?
Yes, there's lots of alternatives. I mean, Gordon's and Cisco's, they kind of, so let's backtrack a little bit. When you look at the landscapes, what is a restaurant? All right, is McDonald's a restaurant? Is French Laundry a restaurant? One of the things that always bothers me is that everything that serves legally and under the definition of the IRS, legally, anything that serves food is a restaurant, right? So a deli that has a table on the patio that serves bagels is a restaurant. McDonald's is a restaurant. My 610 Magnolia is a restaurant. It's all the same, right? So if you look at that, then yeah, the kind of restaurants I run, I hate to use the word one percenter, but it's probably at the 1% of,
Yeah, for sure.
If you catalog every single food service establishment in this country and clump them all together, then yeah, we're probably in the 1 or 4 or 5% of restaurants that are just, different. Because not all my restaurants are expensive. It's not even that. It's just different. And then there's everything else, and you're talking riverboats, casinos. I mean, hospitals. These are all considered restaurants, right? The cafeteria inside the hospital is considered a restaurant. So yeah. So if you're talking about that, yes, between Cisco and Gordon and a couple others, they kind of monopolize 95% of those food service establishments. But then there's everything else. And actually, the 5% are probably, the independent restaurant that people like you probably dine at the most, right? I don't know how often you're going to riverboat casinos, but most of the restaurants that you guys like and make reservations at, and there's a chef, and and while we use Cisco at every restaurant just because we need toilet paper and paper products and candles and stuff like that, but the food can come from many sources, and there's tons of distribution outlets out there, and there's also direct, and you can buy direct from farmers who will literally come down and deliver their products to you. The internet has also changed the game, so there's a lot of things that I can order direct. I can order spices and artisanal honeys direct from producers that will just ship it to me. So that's completely changed the game on that. It's a little more expensive, but if it's worth it for you, you do it. And then, the other thing too is that brands like Cisco have also improved their quality. Because Cisco used to be a bad word, right? Because it was like, everything that was just frozen in a box. But they also have grown in recent times, and they understand that the market is changing. The public wants things that are more fresh, more local, more grown with more care. And so they've also adjusted because they don't want to lose that business either. So they do also have started working with local farms and carrying and distributing products too. So there's, basic answer is there's a combination of all those things.
Last question, really quick. Do you enjoy the sourcing aspect? It feels like that would be an interesting part of the equation.
Yeah, no, it's a constant. I think there's nothing more gratifying or delightful than like finding a new product that you haven't seen before, that you haven't met before, and just being like utterly shocked by it. Because it's almost like discovering a new star or discovering gold. It's like, whoa, look at this. This freaking honey is amazing, And then, we recently discovered there's an American farmer who is raising eels in Maine, and I believe they're called American unagi. And we recently discovered them, and it's one thing that's if you're a chef in this country, like we don't farm raise eel. Like eel is something that they have in Japan and Korea, but you don't see it in the States. It's just not it's not as popular as red snapper. And so the only way to get eel is kind of frozen in packs and stuff. And there's no way to get fresh eel in this country. So I've never really served that much eel in my restaurants. And then we found this company, and they're raising fresh live eels and then shipping them freshly butchered and unfrozen, and it's just like, wow, this is incredible. It changes the game, and so stuff like that really excites me.
I think Russ is going to take us out. Chef, just for me personally, really enjoyed it. There are a million things I'd like to ask you. So if we can, at some point in the future, request that you come back on again, I would greatly appreciate it.
You got it. Anytime. Thank you,
awesome.
Guys.
I learned a lot from you both, and I appreciate that, Ed, you were willing to meet a patron on this podcast and have give us a little education, a little background into the man in the biz.
All right.
Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Chef.
Thank you.